Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will next yield myself such time as I may consume, and then I'll recognize our ranking member to make his opening statement. Without objection, the members of the subcommittee can submit their remarks for the record, or we can have a few opening statements as long as we don't go beyond a minute. I'd like to thank my colleagues for joining me in convening this important hearing where we have the opportunity to take a close look at the challenges to freedom and democracy that exist throughout the Western Hemisphere. Since the beginning of this Congress, we focused our attention in this subcommittee on the growth and opportunity that exists throughout the region. I've long believed that the most effective way for the United States to bring freedom and democracy to people around the world is to promote principles of economic freedom, entrepreneurship, and free trade, a liberalized economic system where citizens are empowered to innovate, pursue their dreams, and decide how best to provide for their families. That's the best recipe for strengthening democratic institutions and the rule of law. Unfortunately, the Western Hemisphere is a home to several leaders intent on stifling economic growth and freedom and eroding democratic institutions and values. The erosion of democracy in Latin America is best described as authoritarianism, masked by progressive rhetoric that, ironically, claims loyalty to democratic values. The late Hugo Chavez of Venezuela, an acolyte of the Cuban dictator Fidel Castro, paved the way for the emergence of the populist left brand of authoritarianism we still see today in Venezuela, Ecuador, Nicaragua, Bolivia, and, regrettably, Argentina. By undermining institutions and the rule of law and threatening their opposition and the press, these leftist leaders have consolidated power and marginalized the opposition. Media laws in Ecuador, Venezuela, Argentina have blatantly stifled the basic democratic right to free press and expression. When a communications law that gives the government the power to regulate media content was passed this summer in Ecuador's National Assembly, President Correa declared that this encroachment on the right to free expression democratizes access to the news media. President Correa, like President Kirchner of Argentina and other populist leftist leaders in Latin America, have attempted to shield their very undemocratic power grabs by labeling them democratic. This shameless populist doublespeak has done much to undermine the intrinsic value democratic institutions have had in protecting the rights of individual citizens. These same leaders have further used populistic, nationalistic rhetoric to justify the squandering of vast economic resources, stifling free enterprise and free trade to the detriment of their people. Venezuela's late President Hugo Chavez nationalized major segments of industry, from oil to agriculture, as part of his socialist agenda, and that included an overt hostility to foreign investment. The result has been flagging production, record-high inflation rates, and scarcity, evident still today under his dubiously elected successor, fellow populist leftist President Nicolas Maduro. Democracies are almost always some form of market economy, and they cannot function without the rule of law. Yet the rule of law is literally under siege in many South American countries. In 2011, Argentina's President Cristina Kirchner announced the nationalization of the oil company YPF, expropriating 51% of the shares owned by the Spanish company Repsol. Her populist rhetoric declared the takeover as a victory for Argentina's energy sovereignty, but the reality has brought disappointment, as Argentina is now a net importer of energy for the first time since 1984. Argentina has been plagued by high inflation, which even questionable government figures are forced to acknowledge. Meanwhile, Argentina has been a generally inhospitable environment for the foreign investment needed to realize its true economic potential. For instance, the government consistently refuses to honor awards issued by the World Bank's International Center for the Settlement of Investment Disputes. Instead, President Kirchner has focused her agenda on growing the public sector in an effort to further consolidate her own power. She has led the passage of media and judicial laws that represent an assault on democratic values while contemplating reform of the Argentina Constitution in order to give her another term as president. A nation so rich in natural resources and human capital is being strangled by authoritarian populism that Kirchner has admired in Hugo Chavez. As I said at the outset, a commitment to the rule of law coupled with free trade and economic liberty will lead to stronger and more vibrant democracies. We should all be encouraged by the exciting free trade bloc known as the Pacific Alliance, ongoing negotiations for the Trans-Pacific Partnership, as well as the prospect that energy reforms in Mexico could bring about greater North American energy independence and security. The Western Hemisphere is commercially and culturally vibrant, and the United States should do more to encourage the opening of markets and opportunity to those nations currently strangled by populism. This will do much to empower citizens, make them less dependent on government, thereby making governments less powerful and less authoritarian. I am so pleased that former Colombian President Álvaro Uribe is here to testify on our first panel. Mr. President, I consider you to be one of the foremost leaders in the entire world of our last century. I know that the great strides that have been made in Colombia have been a direct result of your leadership and your guts and your willingness to stand up and lead. The United States has done a lot of things to try to help that happen, but it would have never happened, never, without your great leadership. As President of Colombia, you tackled a serious threat at the hands of narco-terrorists while bringing security to the people of Colombia. You worked to bring greater prosperity to your country, including with the signing of a free trade agreement with the United States. This subcommittee is eager to hear what you consider to be the major challenges to democracy in our region and how we can be a positive force to encourage the protection of democratic rights and institutions all across our hemisphere. I also want to thank the second panel of experts, Dr. Hector Chamas, Mr. Carlos Lauria, and Dr. Cynthia Arnson for being here with us to discuss the state of democracy in our hemisphere. I look forward to a productive and informative hearing and appreciate you all taking part today. And I'll now recognize the ranking member for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.